actually left her older two siblings, ages 15 and 18, at home alone. And as we drove down the alley listening to Mom going on about her poor children left behind, I looked out the back window and there were two of them in their bathrobes, literally dancing in the alley, jumping up and down and shouting, hooray and whoopee. So she gets to the cathedral finally, and everyone's singing and catching repetitive refrain, "O Madre Mia, Madre Mia." One would have to be a rock not to be affected by such a scene. Without effort or even intention, one is automatically swept up beyond themselves in an overwhelming movement of oneness, wherein the individual is lost in the glory and mystery of the oneness beyond himself. I felt like a piece of driftwood suddenly inundated and buoyed up by this sea of faith and devotion, a power only God and Our Lady could generate. There was a sense this was indeed Our Lady's house, built by her children, who freely came and went, a home always open and welcoming to one and all. I was relieved to find the atmosphere of the cathedral not so much one of petition and supplication as an outpouring of faith and love, wherein individual needs were secondary to the welfare of all. I found here a largeness of spirit that precluded the continuous harping on private concerns, a spirit focused more on the other than on oneself. Although I had already resolved not to pray for myself, I now found it would have been impossible anyway. I felt this was a place of spiritual, not physical miracles. Remembering the children at the school for the cripples, I did not pray for their physical cure, but I prayed somehow that they would become happier people. Absolutely, I felt utterly at home in Our Lady's house, more at home than any place on earth. For me, at least, the focus in the cathedral was not on the miraculous image, but on the pervasive presence of Mary that seemed to fill the cathedral itself. There was no focal point of this presence, it was just there. So, of course, you're supposed to have an intention for a novena at 9 days of prayer. I could come up with nothing more important or meaningful than my sincere desire to see God. Not see God in heaven someday, or maybe when I was older. I wanted to see God now, or as soon as possible. So this is the favor I asked of Mary. If she could get this for me from God, I would be eternally grateful. Indeed, I could ask for nothing more in life. And then she has this amazing vision on the last day of the novena. I was sitting there watching this cloud of smoke near the ceiling, when it seemed to condense into a scene of Our Lady moving slowly from the upper right side of the church to the left. On her right, someone was taking down notes as Our Lady spoke to him or her. If the secretary pointed to someone, Our Lady would say something which was then noted in the book. Sometimes she would point to someone and say something to be written down. The whole scene was very businesslike. Obviously, Our Lady was granting requests and seeing to individual needs. I observed all this with much the same detachment I had looked out the window at the doctor's office, watching people in the street below. Nothing about the scene surprised me. I took for granted Our Lady was taking care of business. And then this happened. After 10 minutes or more of watching this, suddenly the secretary directly pointed at me as if asking Mary, "What about that one?" This unexpected gesture was a jolt that roused me from a detached spectator to an embarrassed focal point. It was disconcerting. I felt caught off guard. Mary glanced in my direction and then gestured to her secretary with a casual wave of the hand as if to say, "Oh, she's already been taken care of," then continued on her way. Where to someone else, Mary's gesture might have been taken as a dismissal of sorts. I understood it perfectly. It meant my prayer, my deepest wish, had already been granted. I would see God. From that moment on, I lived each day in a state of expectancy, thinking any minute I might suddenly see God. It turns out she did see God when she gets back a few weeks later. They went and saw some bullfights, 8 or 9 bulls killed in all, and Bernadette, being the animal lover that she was, says, I didn't give a fig about, her father says, when in Rome, you have to do as the Romans do, so cheer for the bullfighter. She was cheering for the bulls. I was praying as hard as I could for each of those poor bulls and tortured horses. And when, after the bullfight was over, the matador was carried in a procession down the middle of the street below her, she stuck her head out the window and started shouting, "Boo!" when Mom grabbed the back of my sweater and pulled me in with a reprimand, something about being disrespectful in other people's country. So there in Mexico, she had her 10th birthday and considered herself 1/10 Mexican because she loved the people, she loved the culture, and they had the same mother, Our Lady of Guadalupe. They get back to the States, and she is sadly notified that they will be moving from the sea to Hollywood, where her father had built an apartment building. Gazing out to sea, I knew that mere physical distance could not separate us. The mystery of our bond was something I would carry with me wherever I went. Its mystery was in me, a part of me. She read The Imitation of Christ, and that sparked some religious fervor in her. She's still trying to figure out what is her true self. At bottom then, what we really are, what everything really is a mystery known only to God. Carrying this a bit further, I concluded that just as we do not know what God is, so too we do not know what we are, and in this respect we are truly images of God. Thus, as God's image, we are as unknown or as unknowable as God himself. Again, about this truth sensor she has in herself. Sometimes when arguing, I suddenly blurted out something profound that surprised me, something I had not known or even thought of. Sometimes it was as if a spark of light in the mind alerted me to some truth or something meaningful that I must pay attention to or think about. Because of this, I tended to believe truth was stored in some unknowable level of the mind, a level, however, not available to its rational functions. Thus, it was only when you got to the end of all reasoning and thinking, through arguing perhaps, that the truth could be uncovered. I can't help but think the Jewish way of arguing and dialogos, as John Vervaeke would say, of arriving at the truth. Her dad takes her to visit the Discalced Carmelite Monastery in Alhambra, where eventually, spoiler alert, she joined the community. So she asks the sisters to describe their orarium, their daily routine. So then the sister says, she asks the sister, that sounds great. What's so hard about this life? That's just it. It's really not hard, although many people think it is. After a pause. To those who love God, all things are easy. When she said this, my stomach fell. To those who love God. Because I was not one of those. No, I did not honestly love God, never experienced any love for him. This is why I asked Our Lady to let me see God. I was so sure that no one could see God and not love him. For a moment I almost told Reverend Mother the truth, that I did not love God, but for some reason I held back. Maybe because I was ashamed or thought it would shock her. So I put it to her as delicately as possible. Don't you think someone could live this life even if they didn't love God? The Reverend Mother, throwing up her hands. Why would anyone want to do that? And Bernadette replied, because it's a good life. She would have a plot of garden to tend to. She would have her own room. She wouldn't have to eat meat. And she asked the Reverend Mother, do you have any extra rooms? Yes. Will you save one for me? Yes. Is that a promise? The Reverend Mother leaned forward and with a great deal of deliberation said, before God, I give you my word. I promise that whenever you want to come, there will be a cell here for you. The moment she said this, it was as if a gavel